car. Peter Christensen here, coming to you from the CEO's desk. All right, here's your scenario. You represent a buyer, and a seller is wanting to stay, needing to close, but wanting to stay in the property for, let's say, 5 extra days. Okay. Well, there's a couple ways you can handle this, right? You can, in the RECP, just put the date of possession to be 5 days after closing and specify, what time. And then you can, or you can use the short-term lease back addendum. Now, let's say, this is kind of what I've heard recently. Let's say it's a, maybe like a multiple offer scenario, and people are anxious and you don't want to push the seller. And so you might think, well, we're not going to charge them any rent, and we don't even really feel like we can put a security deposit in there. We just don't. We don't want to push these sellers. So what are the pros and cons? Well, the RECP can handle that scenario, but it has some holes in it. It's not really built to contemplate a holdover seller, a seller that stays, right? Because you now have possession, which has changed hands. And so the buyer is now the owner. It's recorded. So insurance is going to look at it as if the buyer owns the property, regardless of whether or not they are occupying the property. Mortgage companies will look at it as the buyer owns the property now. And really, the law is probably going to look at it as the buyer owns the property. What does that make the seller? Well, it makes the seller look an awful lot like a tenant. And we realize the seller's lived there for a long time and it has this continuous possession from ownership to now quasi-tenancy. But what happens if something breaks? What happens if damage is caused? What happens if it's no fault of the seller, but something crazy happens? The water, the sewer main gets backed up, sprinkler leaks, some sort of damage happens. An appliance that was supposed to stay with the property breaks. Is it the duty of the seller to go back to the condition of the property when the buyer first saw the property? Well, or put in an offer. It gets muddy, right? Well, the short-term lease back agreement deals with all of that. And so that's one reason to potentially use it. But I've heard buyer's agents say, but it's too much. It's too much. We don't want to, if we're not charging them any money, what's the point? Because having a security deposit even if you're not charging them rent, having a security deposit is huge. It's really hard to get that money out of, let's say the seller is responsible. They did something, they caused some damages, but it's already closed. Money's been dispersed. Seller has your money, and you're now trying to go after, $1,200 to fix something, $2,000 to fix something. It's going to be really hard, potentially, to get that from the seller unless they're just totally willing and own up to it. The other thing I really like, even if you're there's 2 reasons I'd say contemplate using the short-term lease back addendum. Even if you're going to put 0 in there for rent and 0 for deposit, let's say that there are 2 sections that I think give you some additional protections that there are a lot of them in there, but 2 reasons that I think are important. Number 5 is right of entry. So I've heard of scenarios where the buyer wanted to be able to check up on the condition of the property or had some questions about the seller keeping something up the yard, the pool, something in the house, whatever it may be. but didn't use the short-term lease back agreement, and that they really didn't have a good mechanism for I can come inspect the property midterm. Now 5 days is short, but let's say it's 10, let's say it's 15, let's say it's 20. Then you have the right. It's spelled out in the lease back agreement of when I can come back, when I can come in. So that's one. And then section 9, the penalty for holdover tenancy. I really like this one because the seller can agree all day long with you. Yeah. I'm not gonna, this is part of me selling it to you is I get to stay here for 2 weeks or a week or whatever. But and I'm not paying rent and I'm not paying a deposit. I don't want to fork out any money, but I'll be gone on this date. Yeah, I promise. And what happens if they don't? Then you're chasing after them. You really probably have to evict them under Utah law, and it's just a pain. And so what section 9 does is you can say, yeah, you don't owe me any money, seller, and I'm sure you'll be gone by this date. Just for our peace of mind, let's put a penalty in there. $50 a day, $100 a day, $250 a day, whatever you want to put in there, that then at least gives you something in writing, some damages, a penalty that you can chase after, and gives the seller some pretty good incentive. Where if they're savvy and they say, well, I mean, the worst you can do is give me a notice to vacate, and then it's going to take a few days for that to process. So I bought myself a few days before really anything happens. How are you going to tie that to damages? There was no rent. It's really hard for the buyer to establish what the damages are. So I like that section in there. I like those two, right of entry and penalty for holdover tenancy. So then the magic question that I've been asked 100 times through the years is, okay, how long? When should I use the RECP? When should I use the short-term lease back addendum? There's no right answer. All right, if it's more than a day or two, I personally would feel more comfortable with the short-term lease back agreement, just knowing that every day amplifies the possibility that something goes wrong. And that's what the short-term lease back agreement helps you with. So yeah, it's an extra step when you're trying to maybe navigate an offer situation, and it's a little it takes more explaining to the seller, but it only goes wrong when it goes wrong, and it comes back to bite you when you didn't put this protection in for your buyer and then they run into problems. So I'd say contemplate it, understand what it says, be familiar with it. Again, is there a magic formula of how many days? No, not really, but I'm like I say, I personally wouldn't go more than a day or two without using it. I wouldn't feel as comfortable, but the circumstances will tell you. You can hopefully see when you think it could be more problematic or a bigger likelihood of something going wrong, and then I'd be more likely to push to use that. All right. Remember, this is not legal advice. This is legal information only. If you need specific legal advice, please contact your attorney. Thanks for tuning in.